So while she's setting up, our next presenter is Alison Corey. Alison has a very interesting artificial intelligence project that she's been working on. I guess the larger question that she's asking is, what's funny? So she is our resident artist, and she's got a 3-panel comic that she's going to have the computer generate for us. So I'll let her talk about that.
Okay. So, I did a program on making a comic. Thanks. It's touching. And I'm hoping you find it funny. This is just a little teaser of what I'm going to be talking about later. First, I'll go through all the motions of explaining it. Short, humorous comics. I feel like I should, since it's such a subjective subject, I should talk a little bit more about why I should study it, or anyone should study it in the first place. There's a couple of concrete things, like it's using human and computer interaction sometimes to soften the blow a little bit, like Google's done here with giving error messages and stuff. People might become frustrated if you get bad feedback or just really technical stuff. So it can be used to smooth over interaction between the computer, the deep down stuff, and just the very surface understanding of it that a user might have or not have. Besides that, I really like humor, and it's a subset of AI topics. And humor is also just very human. It's that it's trying to discover a little bit of why it works, why it's interesting, and try to discover how it works, I guess, how we use it. So I did a little bit of research. Whoops, yikes. I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah, forward goes back.
Yes. I think I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Sounds like a previous forays. One of the first examples I could find for trying to make humor or jokes was this Alison Levison's program. It made Tom Swifties, very early '90s. Most of these examples in the beginning are more textual. It seems like they focused on things like riddles and puns. This one was able to pull out like two relating words and make sort of a joke out of it. Tom Swifties, obviously you see the two examples here. Opaque and obscure were the connecting words. Wedding rings and abandoned. A similar group a few years later did Jape. This one is slightly more complex because it is using the beginning of the internet. In 1996, there's WordNet that access to about, I think it's like 100,000 words or so. It would pull them in to help make these kind of sentence jokes. One of the pitfalls is like when they published the research, there's only a couple of good examples, and this was one of them. Apparently, they didn't want to publish the rest. There's a lot of really mundane, bad ones. I think that kind of comes along with having a really big word base and trying to make sense of it all. Okay, there's another one. This one jumps forward a little bit. What? I'm not touching that. This one was rather interesting. This was in 2011. Basically, I abbreviated to TWS as well. That's what she said. Double entendre program. Basically, it would be given a sentence, and based on it already had lists of words, and based on the words it had saved in it, it would judge whether that word itself, they all had weights, whether that word was a high NS, high AS, that's noun sexiness and adjective sexiness. And they had algorithms in place where they had weights themselves, and also depending on how close they were in the sentence, they would have sort of an output of how accurate or how successful this was as a that's what she said joke. So, and also locations to IU, me, and it. And they were able to, out of that, they were able to judge that with 70% accuracy about whether it was a successful that's what she said joke or not. So taking from this, I thought, you know, using like weights and stuff would be a pretty good idea. And the other two I took from that there's a lot of textual joke kind of programs, but there's not really getting into any other types of jokes, so I'll get a little bit into that. So realizing that there wasn't a whole lot of like visual jokes, and you know, programs that were delving into that, I just decided to, you know, study comics themselves a little bit. So I went to some of my favorite ones, and just try to realize or, you know, discover why I guess I like them. Dinosaur Comics is one of them. You might not be able to read what it is, but that's okay. This was started by Ryan North in 2003. He basically decided he was going to be a little bit lazy or something. Like he didn't want to redraw a comic every time. So the thing about these comics is that he uses the same exact formula each time. It's the same exact picture, and then, you know, on a certain day he'll just replace all the text and rewrite it again with new situations. So they started out pretty mundane, kind of like T-Rex would be like, hey, I'm going to step on this house or something, and then it's like, why would you do that, kind of things. And then after a while they started discussing, you know, years later, I mean, he almost came out with these every day. Years later they would be talking about, you know, very specific pop culture references and books and theories and philosophies. So it gets kind of weird after a while. And there was only a couple of times in which it really changed. Like I think there was one time they visited an alternate dimension, so the comic was reversed. So what I liked about this idea was that they used some very defined parameters. Like he couldn't go outside of this kind of construct really, but he did a lot with it. He made it really clever. Another one that's kind of unrelated, it's not really a comic, but one of my initial ideas was that I wanted to, since I was sort of a little bit along the same mental plane as Ryan North, that, you know, if I were to make a comic and I had to draw it like every day or every week, I tend to fall out of habit of that. So when I first thought about this idea, it was kind of like, I wish I could make something that would do it for me, for better or less. And so this guy, although he wasn't making comics, he wrote, this Alexei guy who's from Russia, he wrote a program that would crawl the internet. I think it hit certain hotspot sites. It was never documented. He tried to stay kind of anonymous, but it hit a lot of like book synopsis things, kind of like on Amazon or other sites, and it would just rip out like a piece of a sentence, and sometimes it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And that was kind of part of the humor, so sometimes it left you hanging, like, what was it even talking about? So a lot of people on the internet kind of ended up hating it, and a lot of people ended up liking it. He's got like upwards of 600,000 or so followers. It all gets posted to Twitter, so I mean that helps too. This one person is quoted as saying it's strangely poetic. At the bottom was one of my favorite ones that I didn't have a screen capture of, but everything happened so much and it became reused as kind of a popular phrase. So, and this is just a snapshot of some of the things that were reposted. I liked that he wrote something that found things for him, posted them, and they were made funny. It's just like the ultimate cleverness where you made something that was kind of doing it for you. Last one is another type of comic. You've all probably heard of Garfield. I was not very fond of Garfield until I started reading these. Garfield minus Garfield. It's another man, Dan Walsh, who decided Garfield was funnier without Garfield in it, and you realize there's like a separate thing going on in the comic because John's always talking to Garfield, and Garfield has, you know, thought bubbles, but you can't. John cannot actually hear what Garfield's saying, so when you take him out, you're really just hearing John talk to himself. And sometimes it has really disturbing kind of existential results. And so, what I took from this one, I thought that the 3 panels was a really good formula. It's like the minimum kind of amount of a beat you could get, and still have it kind of close, and just seem good. And the other thing that I liked about this comic was that it didn't intend to make sense all the time. It was kind of, it leaves you hanging a lot of times, because he'll just be in a panel and he'll disappear. There's a lot of, the blank space kind of fills in some weird, like, conclusions you have to make, or loops of logic. I don't know, they seem, I don't know, a lot more interesting, I guess, to me. So, humor theories. So besides the field research on, you know, what's been programmed and what's been written, I took a little bit of research on humor in general. And there's 4 main schools of thought on why we use humor and how we use it. The superiority theory is basically you laugh at people because they're stupider than you, or you know better than them. So when you're watching things, you just have this feeling like you know more than them, and that's funny, or I don't know, you have more intelligence, or you know what's going on and they don't. Relief theory is that humor might be used to relax tension, kind of like if you're meeting a boss or you know, a colleague or something, or I don't know, it's been tense, you might make some things that are funny to relax the situation or release tension. And improve relations between people, that kind of thing. Incongruity theory is basically humor at the absurd, like realizing something doesn't make sense, something doesn't follow. That's kind of one of the ones I ended up wanting to use a lot. That and superiority theory to an extent, because I don't know. First of all, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that when you're building programs, they're not going to be human to begin with. So I kind of wanted it to also be fun, that you laugh at it because it does not follow, and because it might not be smart, but it's still pretty smart. And the play theory is basically that humor is a kind of play. Basically, it goes down to the most basic thing that, like tickling and things like that. That laughter comes from that, but that's more like a contact thing, and that also improves relations to a certain extent. But it's not really a kind of humor that comes out of like a contextual situation. So I did not really expound on that. Original goal, I had some ideas, is that I wanted to have multiple characters that would talk to each other and would say things, maybe they were absurd, and that's kind of the verbal one. The first one is sort of an example of a verbal exchange. The second one,
You should read them
this is what I made up, it's not what my program did. But I just, what's your favorite color? And the other one says Jello. And then they just, they're still happy at what's going on. So that's like an incongruity, it doesn't follow, it's absurd. And the last one, I want to give an example of, I wanted to get into doing visual jokes. So this one, obviously no talking is happening, but something wrong is happening, gravity's failing. So that was the second idea I want to get across. So some sort of very visual joke. I feel like it's going to be, yeah. Tools, I intended to use Java because I was most comfortable with Java. That turned out to be slightly, I don't know, because using a J-layered pane, J-panels, and J-text areas, I had to learn about using the layered panes, and it sounded like a good idea to begin with, but it ended up being kind of difficult. They're kind of basic functions that Java comes with. I'll explain in a minute. The J-layered pane is basically kind of the tray that holds everything, then you kind of add layers to it, but there's a lot of lines of code that go on just to simply adding things or changing things coordinates. And if you add things in the wrong order, it'll just stop adding things to the layers after that, and kind of blows up. So it was kind of a pain to deal with. By the way, that's Duke, the official mascot of Java. I didn't realize that until I started doing this. But I thought it was like a tooth or something, but it's like apparently some, is it?
It's Duke the Tooth.
See, I thought it was a tooth. But it's supposed to, I don't know, and some people said it was a dude with a nose. I don't know, but it's a strange mascot, you don't usually see it. Usually see like a coffee cup or something, I don't know. So the whole time I was making this project, I realized it's very difficult to understand this from what I've given you. I had to draw a picture, so. if I can get this. So, the J-layer pane is basically what everything sits on, kind of like how the Windows window, everything's kind of inside of it. And I had to learn that I kind of wanted to have like a J-layered pane in a J-layered pane, because you can add anything to a J-layered pane. Versus the J panels, you can only add certain things to it, like text areas and stuff. But you can't nest it, so it got a little confusing. So pretty much all the text strings you'll see in a bit are all kind of added to the panels. J-layer pane sits on the bottom, and then the first panel is generated and concluded. They have 100 layers of leeway, but only what's needed is appended to it. So, like, if I only use 6 layers, only 6 layers are on the J panel. Once that one's done, then we do the second J panel. The same story basically for each one of them. And once all 3 of them are generated, then I have the comic frame itself just kind of layer on top of the pane and just flatten it all down. So I feel like it's kind of necessary to have the picture, but it was confusing to work with the whole time, and it just always felt like stuff blew up. Okay, so getting down to the panel generation itself, first, after everything was initiated, like we decided, or we made sure everything existed first, like made sure the panels existed, text areas existed and stuff, but it's not been set yet. So in each panel, we set who is there. Usually it'll generate 2 actors, but we'll decide whether one or the other is appearing, or if they're both, or if they're not. If they are there, then please speak, please say something. But if no one's there, then we move to a different type of actor called like an omniscient actor, which is an invisible actor, and basically it has a speak function which makes a generalization about what's happening if there's nobody there. That was just to fill blank space, more or less. So these are my actors. They are able to form sentences pulling from a word list, and they can be past what the last person said. Basically, what they're doing is they're listening to the conversation and what's happened before. If it's the first panel, then they're making up the conversation. If it's the second panel, I think I had that. If it's the second panel, they will read what's happened in the first panel. If it's the third panel, they're working off of the previous 2 panels. And the word lists themselves, this is an example of one of them. This is the colors list, part of it at least. That colors are used as adjectives, but they're a little special because they also have a color attribute tied to it, an RGB value, which can be pulled out and used later, and that I'll explain. In the actors, they have speak methods. And I try to come up with besides all the nuts and bolts that are in it, an easy way to explain it is that it's kind of like Mad Libs. So the string L1 here is, it's a very basic sentence, and I pass it through a method which will replace each one of those with a random member of that list. So of adjective N, and that's an adjective that's related to the noun, it will generate, or pull out a list of appropriate adjectives based on that noun. The noun will be replaced by a random noun, and the verb will be replaced by a random verb, and an adjective will be replaced by a random little adjective. There's a different sentence creation style that I also employed later too, to give a little bit more variety, where it'll come up with a sentence. It'll start with the, usually, and then it'll say, okay, let's pop on, 1 to 2 adjectives. So then it'll keep adding, the sentence will become itself plus, add an adjective, and then it'll become itself plus a verb until it's built itself, kind of like Legos or something, until the last end of the sentence, and adds in a period. So those are two approaches to doing the sentences themselves. And like I was explaining, was that as it goes further, the characters are reading more into what happened previously, and what they're basically trying to do is pick up on the context of what was being said. Basically, they'll look for, what was said. Was an object said? Maybe it was a chair or something was mentioned, so then they'll try to build what they're going to say on what was said previously. Sometimes they will do a leap, like, are we talking about furniture or something, So they'll use a category that's tied to the object they saw, or something along those lines. Here's an example. Basically what happened first was it used one of the speak functions to make sense. In the second panel, we flip-flopped who was there, because in each panel we decided who might be there, who isn't there. So we decided via a slightly randomizing algorithm that nobody ended up showing up. So we have the generalization silence. And then the last panel we have, since nobody also appeared, we had the omniscient character trying to make sense of what happened. So what the omniscient character saw was that it saw that chair was mentioned. So it put a chair in there, and it made a generalization. So that's just a static sentence, or a static word it came up with. And it also made another generalization here. It says, where'd you guys go? Based on what happened in the previous panels, it realized that nobody was here in this panel, and decided to say, where are they? So, yeah, it's making generalizations of what's going on, is what its purpose was. So I should go into maybe a little bit of the beginning. Sometimes there was too much negative space, and sometimes there was nothing really going on, but I don't know, I thought it was funny in sort of a fantastic way. I don't know. That's actually supposed to be pink. It was two white blank panels, and then a pink panel, and it just says, how about that? So nothing happened. Here's another one. This one was also a mistake in disguise. We have a blank panel, and I'm trying to get rid of these after these runs. Here we have bland cereal's great. Is that food? I forget. What actually happened here was that this panel was not able to pick up what happened in the previous panels. So it has a kind of like a list of error things, they should say, it doesn't look like an error, but that's like an error output. I forget. I didn't know what to make of what just happened, so that was a mistake. This one was when I started making the sentence mixer, the freestyle one. I was like, oh, well, this will be great. I can have between 1 and 3 adjectives before the noun. Then it'll start sounding really colorful or something. But it didn't. It just sounded like we're talking about great-grandparents, but it's like cereal, and there's two nouns. I don't know what was going on there. That was the first run. I was like, what just happened? But the second character picked up that there was food somewhere in that sentence.
Can you read that? I can't read that.
It says, the great, great, great fridge, cereal, fridge, great. So the naivety of the computer is sort of funny, but maybe not in the right way. So these are some outputs of what it's been able to do so far. These, I should still probably start thinking about weeding out, but sometimes too many blanks happen. But we make a generalization at the end, because this character had no sentences to work off of in the previous 2 panels. And the third panel works a little differently, where sometimes they'll make a generalization instead of working off of what was said. So he just says, what a concept. He didn't know what to say, it doesn't happen. And the omniscient character butts in and says not a lot was said. It realized only one person said something, or less than 2 people said something. So he says not a lot happened here. Here's another one. I think this is one of the favorite ones so far recently. And sorry if it's a little hard to read. So far I have nothing happening. Then we're talking about fridges for some reason, and then the second character makes a connection that we're talking about furniture. And then the third character says, oh, here's a piece of furniture, we'll give you a chair. And then it says, where'd you guys go? Because there's nobody in the last panel. So, here's another one. I like that it ended up with ha at the end. It just says ha again, like we're contemplating this. I don't know. Parting words. I think some of the hard parts about this was using the J-layered panes and the panels and stuff. I felt like for the beginning, like the first half of the project, I was kind of wrestling with how the layout worked and how my mind trying to make sense of how these things folded together. Because every once in a while when I would try to mix up, make things a little more complex, then everything would break again. Because if you mess up one thing, then all the layers after that don't get added. And it was always just kind of confusing. So I guess I would say that it's kind of important to, I don't know, even if I was comfortable with Java, maybe I should do a little more research on like things that are actually made for using pictures and stuff. I think it was relatively successful with using, with connecting things. I decided not to use any sort of growing algorithm so it doesn't learn, but I wanted to make sure it was random enough. It needs more categories and word lists and things like that to make it more dynamic, because once I go through a couple of demos, it might feel a little more repetitive. So it needs a little more variety, but I hope at least I touched a little bit on humor as part of the purpose of the project. Any questions?
Did you ever find a good resource on using those layout plans?
I found a lot of, like the Oracle kind of documentation on it. It just doesn't seem like a lot of people were using it, seriously, and I think that kind of makes sense after I worked with it a lot. It's very clunky, like, just to initialize a thing's position took like 4 lines of code or something. It was just, and then I tried to make a method that would allow me to make that shorter or change it, and I was bumping into things. And also using, I didn't mention it, but using layouts. Layouts basically are how things fit together, and the default layout will, if you place something, it'll push other things out of the way. So I had to find out that you had to use a different type of layout. And so things will lay on top of each other instead of side by side. So it kind of gets messy. And each time you have anything that goes in that layout, you have to declare the layout and then add things to it. And there's like 4 lines apiece for declaring. Yeah.
So maybe that's why not a lot of people are automatically generating comics.
Yeah. I guess part of it, I was hoping that I was going to get to a point where I was going to be able to, post them or have them generate themselves at like, I don't know, like 6 in the morning and post themselves, but that's pretty far down the road.
They could get posted to the Guardian.
Even when I'm gone, a little bit, I know. I don't know. Oh.
Are you gonna demo?
Yes, I'm going to demo, but is there any more questions? Nope? Okay.
So these are right here on the fly, never seen before. You don't know what's gonna come up.
Yeah.
Then what the hell?
I mean, as a warning, they're randomly kind of generating. I tried to make them successful, but there's going to be some duds in there. It's thinking. I also decided not to use the design feature. I don't know if I shot myself in the foot or not, because that'd make it more visual, and I'm always trying to understand this code visually, but it's textual. Ictrin's an uncommon color, but it's a yellow color. I had to.
You'll have to read those for
you
us.
You gotta read it to us.
Oh dear, okay. The cerulean couches were terrible. The ictarine fridges were good. Furniture, huh? Table. There you guys go. So I was trying to draw conclusions. It's trying desperately. See if we get some good ones. This one does a similar thing, where it says not a lot was said. It pulls, on here it's purple, it looks blue up here, but it pulls the color purple out of there, because it's not purple, and it made the background purple. That's kind of thing it does. I was trying to make it, pick up things and show that it's picking up references.
Well, did it say purple couch?
Yeah.
Oh, so it came up with a purple
Mhm.
couch.
The cold cereals were great. Pause, indubitably. Oh, here's one of those ones. They shouldn't happen too much, but they make me crack up, but they're bad news. Silence. So, silence. Not a lot was said. similar one. That's been happening a lot because this is the most recent thing I coded, was it being able to pick up who was there, who was not there. Oh, this one's also kind of similar. I'm trying to see if I can get a different pattern. Because sometimes those objects will appear earlier in the comic. So, I quit. Not a lot to said. I guess we're talking to ourselves here. It realizes that there's only one character present and he's talking to himself. Sometimes it takes a while to get a certain pattern going. Furniture, huh? Is that so?
You gotta read the whole thing, because you can't really see it.
Oh, this one's, the lime chair is good. Furniture, huh? So, yeah. I swear though, we're just not getting that pattern in here. I was hoping I could get to show that that does happen earlier in the panels too. Every once in a while, first panel, second panel, there will be nobody there, and the omniscient character tries to step in and generalize what's going on.
So has your own view of humor changed as a result of your project?
A little bit. I think after watching it so many times, it's not been like that funny for me anymore. So it's kind of nice to hear other people laugh at it for once. I've been holed up in my room trying to code this, and I don't know. It's nice that other people get to see it at least.
Any last questions for Alison? Okay, thank you, Alison.